Now I move to the part 5, the historical roots, the state. I try to explain a little bit about the state. Here I cited the Giovanni Arrighi's arguments in his recent works. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. He said that the national markets are no more a Western invention than national states and interstate systems. Through the 18th century, by far the largest national market was to be found not in Europe, but in China. Basically, he based on the Ming Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty agriculture studies, because they found that during that long period, certain kind of agri-market economy already took shape. So that was not the new for China, the first time to encounter it. It's not the first time for China to encounter the market, because there was kind of the long process. At the same time, contrary to the widespread belief, the main attraction of the PRC for foreign capital has not been its huge and low-priced reserves of labor as such. Basically, he talked about the quality of labors. So these were the issue. And some other economists argue that the role of state in the early reform is about the so-called, for example, the Professor Yao Yang from Peking University, he argued that the rule of neutrality of governments were very important in the early stage of Chinese reform. But my argument is that, well, it's very difficult to use the term of neutrality to describe the nature of Chinese government, not only in the 20th century, even by now. It's difficult to talk about the neutrality, the term, because the socialist country, they argued quite ideologically, try to represent the interest of the working class. But because of these, a series of the movements, including the Cultural Revolution, the whole state, the governments, especially his officials, the cadres, there were movements keep them detached from the economic interests to some extent. So in that period, it's very difficult to find these years that the scale, large scale of corruption is not possible. So that's why when Deng Xiaoping raised the slogan, he said, allow some people to be the rich the first, right? He allows some people to reach the first just by arguing the necessity of the reform. At that time, no resistance. If you observe closer, almost no resistance, because everybody thought that the state eventually will represent the general interest. So they believe that, they supported the reform. But if now some political leaders argue that let's just allow some people reach the first, become the billionaire, nobody believed that we will be the billionaire too, follow that. So a lot of the criticism, a lot of the critique of these policies, if you look at the Chinese media, especially the social media. But why? We need to ask ourselves, why at that time when Deng Xiaoping raised the slogans, most of people believe that. The people are not stupid, but people still trust him, believe that, partly because based on the early experience and the state, the rule of the state at that period. So do you have any comments on these kind of the issues of the rule of the state? Because in a market economy, the Chinese reform is a market reform, but market reform launched by the state, right? So the role of the state was so important. If at the beginning, the people thought that the state launched reform is only for small group interests, then you lost the legitimacy, whole reform. Partly because now we are in, to some extent, a certain kind of the crisis, legitimacy. legitimation crisis of reform, partly because of the social differentiation. The people not believe that the people could be reached as others, right? So this is the issue. But from this point of view, we can look back at that time why that could have happened. So that's why I say that the so-called neutrality underlying the production of the modern state, the revolution, and the socialist history is anything but politically neutral. Because the socialist state aimed to represent the interests of the large majority, when the market conditions obtained, it was more able to divorce itself from special interest groups relative to other places. Only in this sense can we say that there was a state of the neutrality. These was crops of the success of the initial stages of reform, as well as the site of the socialist state's legitimacy. Without these premises, it would have been difficult for members of varying social strata to believe that the state representatives could promote reform in their interests. By the same token, the term neutrality often conceals its connotation. So we need to understand the rule of, if we understand that state in that period can launch the reform so successfully and legitimize the whole reform, so radically reform, partly without these backgrounds, it's also very difficult to understand.